Jake Miller came home from work earlier than Sophie, so he had plenty of time to prepare. Naturally, once he was ready, he had to kill some time until she returned. As soon as he heard the garage door open, he took one last look at himself in the bathroom mirror, adjusted his tie, and headed downstairs. He couldn't have asked for a better situation. Sophie was standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking at him as he descended. She noticed the suit and tie and said, "I didn't know we were going somewhere tonight." "We're not," Jake replied. "If we're not going anywhere, why are you dressed like that?" "Because I'm going out." "What's going on, Jake?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "I have a date. I'd love to chat, but I'm running late. I'm not sure when I'll be back, so don't wait up for me." "You have a date? With who?" By this point, Jake was already at the front door. As he opened it, he heard, "One damn minute, Jacob." "We need to." He stepped outside, closing the door before he could hear the rest of what she had to say. Fortunately, his extended cab pickup didn't fit in the garage, which reduced the time she had to reach him. Besides, he thought she was caught off guard and in shock from what was happening, which slowed her down a bit. By the time she stepped outside, yelling, "Damn it, Jake. Get your ass back here," he was already in the truck with the engine running. He just smiled as he backed out of the driveway, turned left, and headed toward the condominium where his date for the evening lived. I suppose a little backstory is needed here. Jake met Sophie Carter during his senior year at the University of Denver. His major was business management, and the course he was taking focused on analyzing managerial decisions. The class was full, and the only available seat was next to him. The professor entered the room at the same time as the young woman who made her way to the only empty seat. Jake knew that most people, at least the ones he knew, thought that love at first sight was just a figure of speech, that such a thing didn't exist. But his first glance at her made him think, she's the one. He hadn't even said a word to her yet, but he was already wondering if he had enough money to buy her an engagement ring. She sat down, looked at him, and said, "Good morning." This is it, he thought. But before he could respond, Professor Harris called the class to order. Jake didn't think he heard half of what the professor said during that session because the dark-haired beauty sitting next to him had captured nearly all of his attention. When the class ended, he followed the girl closely, and thanks to the professor's roll call, he knew her name was Sophie. Once in the hallway, he tapped her on the shoulder to get her attention, and when she turned to face him, he said, "Hi, I'm Jake Miller. I know this should happen under more romantic circumstances, but I don't want to waste any time. Will you marry me?" She laughed and replied, "I'm not sure if I'll say yes or no, but I might, just might, consider you and agree to a date if I'm asked properly." "Are you free tonight?" he asked. "As it happens, I am. How about having dinner with me this evening?" "I think I'd like that." They found out that they both finished their classes at 11:45, so they agreed to meet in the student cafeteria for lunch. Over lunch, Jake learned that the reason he had never seen her on campus before was that she had been attending a local college, and this was her first semester at the University of Denver. They exchanged information, and he learned that she was an only child and that both her parents worked. She was majoring in accounting, aiming to become a certified public accountant, CPA. Her favorite color was blue, and she enjoyed almost all kinds of music except for what she referred to as the noise called rap. She refused to acknowledge it as music. She found out that Jake was also an only child and was majoring in business management to prepare himself to take over the family business when his father finally decided to retire. He didn't have a favorite color, but he agreed with her opinion about rap. They agreed that he would pick her up at 6 o'clock, and then they both went to their afternoon classes. Their date went well, although Sophie laughed at him quite a bit, mostly, Jake thought, because she didn't take him seriously when he asked her ring size and what kind of engagement ring she would like. He also asked her what she would want from a wedding and whether they should wait until they both finished school before tying the knot. As he was driving her home, he told her, "I was completely serious. When I first saw you, I immediately knew you were the one I was meant to be with. Let's face it, fate, karma, or whoever's in charge made sure you attended the same class as me and that the only empty seat in the room was right next to mine. We're meant to be together, and you need to accept that." "You're being ridiculous. We barely know each other," she said. "That's why we need to keep seeing each other, so you can learn everything you need to know about me. I've already told my parents I've met their future daughter-in-law, and they can't wait to meet you. How about having dinner with them this Friday?" "I don't think so. You're moving a little too fast for me. That's because I know we're meant to be together, and I want to continue building our life together." "Well, you might be sure, but I'm not. Until I get to know you a hell of a lot better, I'm not agreeing to anything. You're charming, and I like your determination, but I'm not the type to rush into things. I'm going to explore what else is out there before making any big decisions." Jake wasn't pleased to hear that, but he knew, absolutely knew, that they were destined to be together, so he wasn't about to give up. Over the next 3 months, Jake asked Sophie out repeatedly, but every third time, she'd apologize and tell him she already had plans for that day or evening. As the Christmas break approached, Jake decided to put everything involving Sophie on hold until the new year. It wasn't that he'd lost interest, it was more a matter of self-preservation. He knew Sophie was seeing other guys, but he'd never seen her with one, and he was damn sure he didn't want to. He thought that if he asked her to go with him to a party at his friend's place and she told him she already had a date that evening, he could still go to the party, but she would avoid it, knowing he'd be there. Was this an example of strange thinking? Hell no, it was an example of dumb thinking. A college student with a GPA of 3.78, and he was being that foolish. Jake's fraternity was hosting a party, and he asked Sophie to go with him, but she told him she already had a date that evening. He went alone, and about 40 minutes after the party started, Sophie arrived with Ryan Collins. It was bad enough seeing her on the arm of someone else, but Ryan Collins? You couldn't find a more insufferable jerk even if you scoured the entire world. Jake couldn't take it. He had to leave 5 minutes after they arrived. He noticed Sophie watching him as he walked out. He decided to skip all the holiday parties for the rest of the year. It wasn't meant to happen. His Uncle Michael and Aunt Laura came to visit him, and with them was his cousin Emma. They convinced him to take Emma to a party at his college dorm. He didn't want to, he really didn't want to, but how could you resist when your mom and dad, along with your aunt and uncle, were all pressuring you? On the way to the party, Emma asked him why he was so reluctant. "Are you embarrassed to be seen with me?" "Good heavens, no. You're really hot, and you know it." Then he explained what was going on. "So if she's there, point her out to me. She doesn't know I'm your cousin, so I'll hang on to you and see if we can make her jealous. I think she won't care at all. It doesn't hurt to try. Can you guess?" Not only was Sophie at the party, but she was looking right at them as they entered the room. Emma heard Jake's sharp intake of breath and immediately understood. "Where is she?" "Straight ahead, by the wall, in the blue dress." Emma glanced at him, flashed a dazzling smile, and squeezed his arm tightly. Ignoring Sophie, Jake introduced Emma to his fraternity brothers and their girlfriends. About 20 minutes after they arrived, Sophie approached them and said, "Hi, Jake. Introduce me to your friend." He introduced them to each other, and then Sophie shocked him by asking Emma, "Are you trying to steal my man?" Emma laughed and said, "If he were your man, darling, he'd be here with you, not with me. Come on, sweetheart, show me around." And she led them away from Sophie. It was a fun party, and they had a great time. Emma drew a lot of attention to herself. A few of Jake's fraternity brothers, knowing how he felt about Sophie, asked him if there was anything going on between Emma and him. He told them no and explained that she was just his date for the party. Essentially, he gave them the green light to ask her out. Before they left, Jake needed to use the bathroom, and when he came out, he found Sophie waiting for him. "I meant it, you know." "Meant what?" "That you're my man. If you'd asked me, I would have been at this party with you. I didn't ask you because the last 3 times I invited you on a date, you turned me down, saying you already had plans. I got tired of hearing no, so I stopped asking. Sorry, but I need to find my date." And he walked away from her. On the way home, Emma said, "Your fraternity brothers are a bunch of backstabbing jerks." "Why do you say that?" "Even though I was your date, they kept hitting on me." "They're not jerks. They know how hung up I am on Sophie, and they asked me if there was anything going on between you and me. When I said no, they asked if I'd mind if they tried their luck, and I told them to go for it. I wish I'd known that earlier. There are a couple of them I would have said yes to." Jake turned the car around, and she asked him, "What are you doing?" "Taking you back to the party to see if those guys are still there." Once they were back, he let her go and headed down to the game room to play pool while she mingled. Eventually, she came down, got him, and said she was ready to leave. One of the guys she would have said yes to was Ethan Carter, and they ended up getting married. The next morning, Sophie called Jake and asked if he would meet her for lunch at the Rusty Anchor. Curiosity made him say yes. She was already there, sitting in a booth when he arrived. He sat across from her, and before he could say a word, Sophie said, "I know what I want for Christmas." "What? An engagement ring? You once asked me my ring size." "I don't know, but when we leave here, we can go to Zales and find out. I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but where did this sudden change come from? I've dated enough guys to make comparisons, and you came out on top. Seriously. That, and the trick you pulled with your cousin, made me realize I could lose you to someone else." "How did you find out she's my cousin?" "She told me." "She told you? How did that happen?" "She noticed me nervously glancing in your direction and figured I was upset seeing you there with her. So she came up to me and told me not to worry, that she was your cousin, not someone trying to steal my man." "Just to clarify, I wasn't pulling a trick," Jake said, and explained how he didn't even want to go to the party because he might see her there with a date and how everyone pressured him into taking Emma. Well, whatever it was, it worked. It really did work. 6 weeks after Jake's graduation, he and Sophie got married. Sophie still had another year before earning her degree, and Jake wanted to wait until she finished school, but she didn't want to wait. She insisted, and he gave in. He wanted a simple civil ceremony, but their parents wouldn't hear of it, so they ended up having a full-scale wedding. The ceremony took place at a picturesque chapel in the outskirts of Denver, surrounded by the Rocky Mountains. The reception was held at a luxurious venue downtown, where friends and family celebrated late into the night. The next 7 years were some of the happiest of Jake's life. Sophie and he were still acting like they were in their honeymoon phase. Then, a snake slithered into their garden. His name was Daniel Green. He transferred to Sophie's office from the company's branch in Chicago. He was charming, confident, and had a reputation for being a ladies' man. Daniel decided that Sophie should be with him and started pursuing her. Maybe it was the so-called 7-year itch, but whatever the reason, Sophie accepted his advances. At first, it was lunches together, then after-work drinks. What Sophie forgot was that Liam Turner, one of Jake's college classmates, worked at the same place as her, and since she didn't seem to care whether her coworkers knew what she was doing, Liam was able to learn quite a bit about her activities. Liam called Jake and told him what Sophie had been up to. So far, everyone agreed that things hadn't progressed beyond hand-holding and kisses. The lunches weren't long enough for anything to happen, and after a few drinks and some dancing when they socialized with colleagues after work, they didn't leave together. When Jake put all of this together and added the fact that she was never late coming home, he realized Daniel hadn't yet managed to get her into bed. That changed the day Liam called him. He'd overheard them talking about a date on Saturday, and from what he heard, they planned to end the evening in a hotel room. One of the things Liam overheard Sophie say was that she intended to come home and hit Jake with it flat out, tell him that she was planning to start dating another man. Jake told his dad he needed to leave a little early to deal with a personal matter. On his way out, he stopped by accounting and asked Olivia Harper for a favor. "What do you need, Jake sweetheart?" "I need a date for dinner and dancing tonight." "Wow, Mr. Virtuous is taking a break from his wifey?" "Hold your horses." Jake explained the situation to Olivia, and she was shocked that Sophie would do something like that. He had no doubt Olivia would jump at the chance to go on a date with him. At the first company Christmas party he attended with Sophie, he found out that Sophie and Olivia knew each other and didn't get along. Knowing he planned to make sure Sophie heard all about the date, Olivia agreed. When Jake picked up Olivia, he mentally scolded himself for not handling things differently. He should have waited until Sophie actually cheated on him with Daniel. Then he'd be justified, at least in his own mind, in having revenge sex with Olivia. He had always known she was a pretty girl, but in her little black dress and heels, she was absolutely stunning. She smiled and said, "Thanks for what?" "For the compliment your eyes just gave me." He wasn't sure, but he thought he blushed. He offered her his arm, and they headed toward his pickup truck. They had dinner at the Silver Spoon, a high-end steakhouse in downtown Denver, and after the meal, they went to the Moonlight Lounge to dance. Jake chose both places because Sophie had good friends who worked there, and he was confident that one or more of them would call Sophie before he even got home. During the slow dancing, Olivia pressed herself against him and just smiled, intentionally brushing against his arousal. She was clearly enjoying herself, knowing she was turning him on and that Sophie would hear about it. It was obvious to Jake that Olivia intended to get him into her bed before the night was over, not because of his masculine charm, but because she undoubtedly wanted to tell Sophie all about it. And while Olivia was sure she had him, Jake was just as certain that wasn't going to happen. Did he want it to happen? Hell yes. But cheating on his wife just wasn't in his rule book. Jake walked Olivia to her front door and thanked her for a wonderful evening. She grabbed his head and gave him one hell of a passionate kiss, then invited him in. He thought he shocked her when he said, "No. We both know what will happen if I do, and tonight isn't about that. I was upfront with you about what this was all about, and you agreed to help me make it happen. Don't think for a second that I don't want to come inside, because we both know I really do. Thank you for helping me." He kissed her on the cheek, turned around, and walked back to his pickup truck. He drove to the Midnight Diner, had some coffee, and read the newspaper until 4 a.m., then went home. He got home at 4:20 in the morning, expecting Sophie to be asleep in bed, but she wasn't. She was awake, sitting on the couch in the living room, and reading a book. As he walked in, he simply smiled at her, walked past, and headed upstairs to their bedroom. He had just taken off his jacket and was hanging it up when Sophie walked into the room. "I can smell her perfume on you." "Who is she?" "I'd assume at least one of your friends has already called and told you." "Two of them, but they didn't know who the woman was." "You know her?" "Olivia Harper." "That witch? You threw our marriage in the trash for that witch?" "Oh, come on, Sophie. No need to be so dramatic. Let me ask you something. What did you feel when I walked out the door? Tell me, Sophie. I really want to know." She just stared at him. The anger on her face was clear, but somehow she managed to hold herself back. "Maybe you've been asking yourself why I went out with another woman," Jake continued, his voice calm but firm. "Wondering why you weren't enough for me. Asking yourself what you did wrong, what you did to push me away." Finally, Sophie reached her breaking point and couldn't hold back anymore. "How could you? 7 years. 7 years that I thought were damn good years, and you threw it all away just to roll around in the hay with that adulteress. Jake smiled at her and said, "Go on. You're on a roll now. What the hell is wrong with you, Jake? You're treating this like it's some kind of joke." "Well, I do find some humor in the situation. Let me see if I've got this straight. You're mad because I went on a date with another woman, so mad, in fact, that you're considering divorce. Is that about right?" She shook her head in disbelief at his attitude. "And one more question for you. What makes Olivia an adulteress?" "Oh, really? And what else would you call a woman who dates a married man?" "That brings up another question. What would you call a married woman who dates a man who isn't her husband?" "An adulteress? An unfaithful adulteress? Thank you for clarifying that for me. I wasn't entirely sure what to call you. Are you saying I'm an adulteress?" "Just calling it like I see it. You're a damn jerk. How dare you call me an adulteress?" "Hey, back off. I'm just calling you what you are, according to your own words. A married woman who dates a man who isn't her husband. You're a married woman, and you're dating Daniel Green. Therefore, by your own definition, you're an adulteress." Her face turned pale, and Jake saw the expression that clearly read, "How much does he know?" Jake leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, and said, "Here's something for you to think about. Remember how you felt when I walked out of here last night, and play that feeling over in your head until you see it from the other side. That's how you intended to make me feel when you went on your date with Daniel tonight. You know, the date that's supposed to end in a motel room. But there's one thing that puzzles me. I can't seem to remember what I ever did to make you think I'd just stand there and take it when you told me you were planning to date another man. For the life of me, I can't recall what made you think I'd be so weak as to say, 'Yes, dear, have a good time.' I would have thought you knew me well enough to understand that when Daniel came to pick you up, I'd beat the crap out of him. Of course, that won't happen now because you'll undoubtedly call him and tell him not to pick you up and that you'll meet him somewhere instead. Anyway, it's been a long night, and I need to get some sleep." He left her standing there in shock, went to the guest bedroom, and went to sleep. He half expected her to follow him and want to talk, but she didn't. When he woke up and went downstairs, she was asleep on the couch. Why she chose the couch instead of their bedroom, he wasn't about to ask. He went to the kitchen and, as quietly as possible so as not to wake her, made some coffee. Once it was ready, he poured himself a cup, went out to the patio, and sipped his coffee while thinking about what to do next. Divorce? Maybe, but that was a last resort. Jake truly loved this foolish woman and really didn't want to let her go. Love or not, if she had already slept with Daniel, she'd be history. But based on everything Liam had learned, it was clear that hadn't happened yet. What to do? What to do? In the end, Jake figured it would depend on Sophie. If she didn't want to stay with him, there was really nothing he could do about it. If she went on that date with Daniel, it would be the end of them. He had been sitting there for about 10 minutes when Sophie came out with a cup of coffee in her hand and sat down across from him. She took a sip and then said, "What would you like for dinner tonight?" "I'm not really in the mood to cook, so I'll probably grab something somewhere." "No, I'm asking what you'd like me to cook for you for dinner." "I thought you had a hot date tonight." "Not anymore." Jake looked up from his coffee, and Sophie said, "This morning, I had a wake-up call. I woke up realizing that I was about to throw away a damn good marriage with a great guy for a fling with someone who isn't even close to being in my husband's league. There's really no excuse for my actions. I let a bunch of compliments and flattery go to my head. I used to get the same compliments and flattery from my husband, but at some point, I convinced myself that he was only saying those things because he had to, it was part of his job description. Coming from someone else, it felt like validation that I was still a desirable woman. Luckily for me, or at least I hope it's lucky for me, the only thing that ever happened was a few kisses and some hand-holding. Now, Because of my stupidity, I'm determined to put in the extra effort to convince my suspicious and doubtful husband that I've pulled my head out of my ass. Well, I'm not going to say you're facing an impossible task, Jake said, his tone softening slightly. But I will say you've got a pretty tough job ahead of you. Then I'd better get started. Want to head back inside and work up an appetite before I take you out for breakfast? Jake stood up, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I'd love to. As they walked back into the house, Jake couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work after all. But deep down, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Still, for the woman he loved, he was willing to try.